Warm greetings, everyone. Just testing my mic. Can you all hear me at LSA? Can you hear me? Okay. I hope the audio is good. Hello, hello. I'm trying
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. All right. Wow, welcome everyone. We really have a good audience. I'm excited. We have a few more minutes to the beginning of this panel, so we're just gonna wait for people to roll in, including the other panelists. Hey, Dr. Badejo. Okay, still connecting to audio. Okay, good. Dr. Badejo, can you try to test your audio mic and can you say something? We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you now. Okay. Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And it's morning for me.
All right. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You know, this is one of the times that I sort of appreciate the Yoruba language. Akudede asiko yi o, regardless of what the asiko is, wherever you are. Yeah. Okay. So I am going to also try to be sure that I can share. Can you all like see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So just doing all the, thank you for the feedback. Just doing the testing. Dr. Balaja, will you be sharing slides?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, good. So that should work.
Like, not shared. Just
Oh, yeah, that works too. Trying to be sure that technology is cooperating with us today. Oh, wow. That's good. Are you in Ife today?
Yes, I have.
Okay. All right. We have a few more minutes, so hopefully others will join us and we can start right on time.
Thank you. Voices. Let's make sure you're in.
I'm muted. Hello, Babatunde Salam, can you hear us? Okay, I think it's so.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but it was a bit noisy at the background. There was a lot of echoing of background noise. So
Just yeah, press.
do you want to try to say something again? Let's see what the volume is like now.
I should try saying.
Okay. So we have 1 minute to the start, and we're going to try to start right on time so we can have ample time for questions and answers afterwards.
Let me see.
Hello.
Maybe it's not on. Right? It's going to hear you from here. Presenters presents like person while the panel is on and the chair is online. So she's definitely going to hear you anytime.
Okay, but she couldn't hear me now.
Bluetooth disconnected. Bluetooth connection succeeded.
You know what? Try leaving it.
Yes. I can hear from LSA. Can you all still hear me? Okay. Can you all hear me? Okay. All right. Thank you. Warm greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining this panel. And we're just going to start right now. So this is the panel on reproductive identities in Africa, problematizing the intersections of gender, class, age, and everything in between. And so today we have 5 panelists, and we're going to go in the order of the program that we have. So we're going to have the first presentation by myself. Esther Ajayilowo. It's going to be on emerging reproductive conundrum, conversations on IVF, surrogacy, and baby factories in Nigeria. And I'm just going to go ahead and introduce myself. I was going to introduce all the panelists just before we start, but because some of the panelists are yet to join us, so I'm just going to go ahead and introduce myself, go ahead with my paper, and then come back to introduce each of the other panelists, and then they can go with their paper in that order. Right. So I am going to start my presentation. And okay. So my paper today is on reproductive conundrum, emerging conversations on IVF, surrogacy, and baby factories in Nigeria. And just before I forget to read a little bit of introduction of myself, my name is Esther Oluwashino Ajayilowo, and I am, well, working at Spelman as an assistant professor. And I'm saying I am, and we laugh because I'm just like transitioning at the moment. I just resigned from Spelman College and will be joining Texas Christian University in the fall. So I'm in between those two institutions for now. So I hold a PhD and a master's degree in multicultural women's and gender studies from Texas Women's University. And my research interests include Black women maternal health, childbirth epistemologies, global reproductive health rights and justice, as well as feminist pedagogies. So that's just a little bit about my introduction today, and I'll go ahead. I want to be sure like you are still seeing my slides. Okay, great. And so just as a way of introduction and overview, there have been a lot of changes in reproductive identities in Nigeria, given the global advancements in reproductive technologies. And as of now, Nigerians are already taking advantage of all the kinds of assisted reproductive technologies that are available. And that would include the IVF, be it the kinds that would be genetic, people who are becoming egg donors, sperm donors, some women who are waiting to have babies in the future, who might have some reason to freeze their eggs, are also doing that. So that is like really an ongoing thing that is becoming really popular. There's also surrogacy, which is also in two forms, be it the traditional surrogacy where the surrogate mother is genetically connected, or the genetic surrogacy where the person who is going to be the mother of the child will be genetically connected, and the surrogate mother is just a womb space for the embryo. So these changes are all coming against the backdrop of what it used to be in most African settings, including Nigeria, and specifically the Yoruba culture, which I am familiar with. And I'm also doing a specific research on what surrogacy used to be like, specifically in the Yoruba culture. So more broadly, we can say it's been more of personal conversation between and amongst people who would decide to either co-parent or help raise other children that are not biologically theirs, and those children could be known as their own mother. For instance, you might have someone who is not the biological mother of a child being called Mama Lagbaja, Mama of that child, even though they don't have a biological connection. So we have had all this in place. It used to be amongst families. It used to be, communal, and there's been all of these strategies to really help with people who are facing challenges with fertility. And again, now we're having a change to the so-called social, legal, Euro-Western medical and transactional and even capitalistic sort of ways that people are really dealing with infertilities and trying to become mothers and parents more broadly. And some of the conversations that I think that should really already, we should already be having will be, what would consent look like? political economy, given the rate of poverty in the country. Unfortunately, all of the legal complexities and the issues of baby factory, they've already been existing, and that continue to exist alongside this new evolvement of surrogacy, IVF, and the ways that people are making use or taking advantage of reproductive technologies that we're having now, and all of the ways that even adoption has been caught in a lot of illegalities in the country. So these are some of the things to think about as Nigerians keep taking advantage of the ARTs in the moment. So these are some of the questions that I'm asking and that I will be trying to respond to a little bit in this presentation. So how would imagine-assisted reproductive technologies broadly impact reproductive identities in Nigeria and in Africa more broadly? What measures must be in place to cope with the emerging ARTs, which is the reproductive technologies, assisted reproductive technologies. I think I'll just say ARTs for sure. And what conversations do we need to start having on the issues of gender, class, age, culture, and healthcare implications of ARTs in Africa? What would reproductive justice look like? And reproductive justice in itself is a big concept that is really thinking about the right of people to have children, not to have children, and also to be able to raise these children in safe and sustainable environments and communities. What would that look like in this moment where we're having this AR? Also, this paper adopts an African feminist lens in raising these questions and trying to respond to them and some other questions, knowing that all of these questions are questions of gender, class, race, age, geography, nationality, and other intersectional vectors of identities that people might have when they're in this space of trying to navigate these new, quote unquote, new advancements and modern ARTs. Just by way of giving some case studies, so this has been something that a lot of people are taking advantage of, but the most popular ones are the elites, the people who are in the media, who are popular figures. We could call them famous, we could call them celebrities, who have been in the public space of people who have had babies through surrogacy or IVF. And this is giving a lot of publicity to this sort of ARTs, and others are beginning to take advantage of that. So I just wanted to highlight some of the popular figures that have been known in the public space to have taken advantage of this ways of dealing with delay in childbirth, or just like taking advantage of ARTs more broadly. And it is just like quite interesting to think about the categories of these people when we think of not only gender, but also class. And then to also think about age a little bit when we think about IVF, and we are seeing people, you know, as old as 68, 67, and in their 50s, also taking advantage of, hey, I can also have my baby through IVF. So these are some of the conversations that are ongoing. There's also a lot of so-called campaign, right? And I'm trying to refrain from calling it advocacy. There's a lot of campaigns get towards people to start taking advantage of these strategies, these ARTs. And one will see all of that on social media platforms, right? And so this is one that I just like screenshot from Facebook, and it's a longer list actually. I just screenshot the ones that I could that will fit my slide. And so we could see that already like a lot of Facebook groups with a lot of people wanted to know about surrogacy in Nigeria, wanted to take advantage, wanted to support one another. There's a lot of campaigns to solicit for people to become surrogate mothers, or for people who have the means to also hire surrogate mothers to have their babies. The same thing with IVF. There are a lot of groups on WhatsApp, on Instagram, and there's a whole lot of campaign. So this is something that is becoming more and more popular, trending, and there needs to be this scholarly conversation to think through all of the complexities that we should actually be grappling with. And so this is just one organization of interest, one of the agents, which is called Meet Surrogacy Mothers, that is connecting surrogates and people who would want to hire them. There's a whole lot of conversation that would, have at some point in my slides on all the thoughts that I'm having on these issues from a feminist standpoint. And also would see also that the media, even like the TV and the so-called established media also, in addition to the popular social media, right? The traditional media is also talking about it. So you would see a whole lot of videos on TVC channels who are also bringing in experts, who bringing in people to talk about these issues. And these are just screenshots of some of the things, some of the videos that are beginning to trend, and one could see the views, right? So this is something that's getting really interesting and popular. So this is also another one from TVC, another one from TVC, and they're inviting legal experts, agencies, and also just people who are experts in the medical field to address some of these issues. There are a lot of thoughts that I have on that, but I will still leave some of that to the questions and answer. And when I'm thinking about the sort of ways that they're going about it, is this also comprehensive enough? Is this just some form of strategy to just campaign? Is this more business-like, or are we really getting a whole lot of comprehensive and critical conversation that we need to have on these emerging issues? And there's also a way that you can see the media also thinking through, hey, we have surrogacy, we have these challenges, how can we also really navigate? So in this particular one, I really love this. This seems to be very investigative from Premium at times, and it's really questioning the ways that the baby factory is mirroring what the surrogacy is tending to look like in some aspects as well. And this issue surrounding surrogacy in Nigeria on TVC was really echoing. It was the only one that I found that was also really echoing the voice of a surrogate mother who was sharing her own experience. And at that point, it was really different from all of the things that one would hear from the legal experts and the agencies. This person was thinking about how little she was paid in trying to really be a surrogate mother, and how all of that really went south, and she wasn't happy with the transaction. So that, at least in one way, is saying that, hey, this is really good. People are taking advantage and becoming mothers, or able to become mothers despite some infertility challenges. But at the same time, we have to think about where, on the other side, people who are producing this labor and what that means for them as well. So the conversation needs to be holistic. But I think that in most of the ways, there's really not emphasis on the surrogate mothers, the people whose labor are being hired, who they are, the challenges that they are facing, and what all of this means for them, even in terms of healthcare. There's definitely, in addition to all of the popular, scholarship, there's also really scholarly discourse on the issues of surrogacy and ARTs. And most of these, I try to group them into like legal discourse. People are already challenging the fact that Nigeria doesn't have a so-called like very specific legal framework, right, where people can really reach agreement and try to be bound by those contracts and the sort of legal agreements that would protect the surrogate mothers. People are already challenging, scholars are challenging the ethics of all of these, the moral standing in all of these, in just like hiring a labor, taking this baby away from the surrogate mother, or even when it's anonymous, and the sort of ethical issues that could arise from all of that. And some are actually focusing on both the social, legal, and also like just more like multi-dimension, which I grouped into social, legal, and moral dimensions of the discourse. So definitely there have been some researchers, looking into this in the meantime. But I also see that despite that, I haven't seen a lot of conversation around, hey, what if we have legal framework? Would that be the solution? And we can think about surrogacy in India and the ban of surrogacy and what that meant, right? And how we're thinking about Nigeria as well, and even globally, when there's usually a lacuna between legal framework and implementation on the ground. So in my view, legal framework, just like regulating it, wouldn't be a holistic way to just like resolve all of these complexities that are unfolding. There's also needs to be this critical gender discourse that is not really starting, thinking about fertility. What if there's no pressure to just, have your own baby, so to say? Would people still be doing IVF at 60, at 60, at 60, at 50? Would people do IVF repeatedly, say after several failed attempts? Are people really aware of some of the health consequences, right? Are we having all of this gendered discourse and conversation and the pressure on women and fertility against the backdrop of, hey, there's ART and you can have your baby no matter how old and no matter the circumstance, right? There's also the class disparities that we need to really think about. who are the people hiring surrogates and who are the surrogate models? What are the class disparities, and what does that mean for the people whose reproductive labor is being hired? And then the maternal health care gap is really wide. From all of my research and findings, I haven't really seen any campaign research really focusing on the health implications. But globally, there have been a few scholars who have challenged, for instance, IVF, making connections between IVF and mental health and what it means, and the health drain, especially when it's done repeatedly and it continues to fail. There's really the conversation around the sort of failed attempts. We only hear about the very success story. Oh, this person just gave birth to IVF, triplets and twins, and no one will say this is how many times they've tried. Sometimes there's really no clarity or transparency around the costs, all of the cost implications as well. And so these are some of the things that are still missing and still taken for granted. The capitalist exploitative tendency of this process, which I've said some things about. And also there needs to be the connection between what is going on in Nigeria and the global and transnational reproductive labor approaches or discourse that we're already having. Thinking about how most of the campaigns that I highlighted initially were also targeted at women from outside Nigeria. So for instance, the one on milk surrogacy will say, oh, are you abroad and you need to hire a surrogate mother in Nigeria, we can help you. There's a lot of campaign around, oh, are you in the UK, we can help you hire a surrogate mother in Nigeria. What does that mean? All of this transnational, hiring or even exploitation of reproductive labor needs to be part of the conversation, because this is not something that's just happening within Nigeria. The world itself, as we know, is a global village, and usually reproductive labor usually cross borders. So that needs to be part of the conversation. And child rights, definitely. Who is thinking about the rights of the child in all of this while we're thinking about motherhood and the people? And just trying to get into the end. So towards a holistic approach, in my mind, there needs to be an approach that is really holistic, thinking about all of the identities of the peoples involved and thinking about how we can decolonize this approach and also approach it from an epistemological viewpoint. So earlier on, I was thinking about age, race, gender, nationality, and I said some things about that. But for me, it has to also be a decolonial approach that lets us think about what does this hero Western strategy around assisted reproductive reproductive technologies mean for us in Nigeria, for us as Africans, right? How are we processing what it used to be for us and this new trend? And is there a way that this is also encouraging on what our cultures used to be, and how can we navigate all of those things? So for me, concluding thoughts will have, our ART, surrogacy, and all of these emerging reproductive technologies would have to entail some sort of comprehensive awareness on all of the options. Education on consent, the failure rates, cost implications, the pros and cons, not just the pros, right, of IVF, surrogacy, and childbirth at old age. We need to focus on all of the maternal postpartum health implications, and also connect this to maternal mortality and morbidity, because if we don't know who the surrogate mothers is, how do we take care of their postpartum health care? Is that even part of the package? Is that part of the contract? Do surrogate mothers know that this journey does not end when you give birth to the child and the child is taken away? So part of their consent and agreement, is it also thinking about how postpartum period could also be, as scholars have found, that even up to 1 year after childbirth? And is that also covered? Is there even information around that? Are we connecting this to all of the ways that we're thinking about reproductive health care more broadly? And thinking about motherhood on the African continent, connecting it to Oyewumi, who wrote What is the Gender of Motherhood in 2016. So think about that. For us, motherhood is not just for women, it is for everybody. This communal, right? It doesn't have to be biological. When we think about all of that, we'll be able to really approach this new ARTs from a very critical standpoint, right? And then also to think about reclaiming African traditional surrogacy, which is what I'm calling it. African traditional surrogacy is different from the emerging traditional surrogacy where you hire about, as someone to carry your baby and use the Western medical, and putting the African to really contextualize that, to think about the ones that we've had over time, where people can make agreements within families, within communities to raise one another's children, and also be mother and also be parents in that way, without having to really subscribe to all of the pressures that might come with ART. And so these are some of my references, and I'll be open to questions afterwards. So thank you, and it's the end of my presentation. Okay, and the next presentation is, the next presentation is going to be by Dr. Ayowole Elugbaju. Dr. Ayowole Elugbaju lectures in the Department of History and International Studies at Redeemers University, Ede in Nigeria. He holds a PhD from the University of Ilorin, Nigeria, and is a fellow of the Ife Institute of Advanced Studies in Ile-Ife. His research interests include social history, cultural history, African history, heritage studies, African/diasporic belief systems, and comparative historical studies. Dr. Elugbaju is well published, and his articles are featured in local and international journals. So Dr. Elugbaju is going to be taking us on gender and Oro Ile country fashion, the male gender at the intersection of women's reproductive health and the Yoruba cultural practice. So, Dr. Elugbaju, please take it away. Dr. Elugbaju, you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Good morning. Is it afternoon? Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Professor Esther, for the introduction. As you said, the title of my paper, my name is Ayowole Elugbaju. The title of my paper, it's an ongoing work anyway, so it's an idea in its formative stages. So, but anyway, the title of the paper is Gender and Oro Ile, in brackets, country fashion, the male gender at the intersection of women's reproductive health and Yoruba cultural practices. What influenced the idea behind this paper is I'm from Ife, quite all right. So I went to one of my parents' family compounds, particularly the Eranjedi, the Obatala lineage family. So right there, I encountered they were conducting what do you call it, naming ceremony, traditional naming ceremony. I had not witnessed that before. So I saw the materials used and the process, the procedure. So I began querying what role did Obatala have to play in the birth of this child? Because the parents practically submitted the child to be named at the feet of Obatala, the deity. So in the process of my inquiry, I came across Oro Ile as a very vital part of Ife social-cultural practice as far as childbirth and post-childbirth activities go. So, already, when I went through JDYP's work, Religion and the Making of the Yoruba, I noticed he talked about Oro Ile quite a bit. And from his analysis, he regarded Oro Ile as those non-religious practices, that is, religion in the context, as understood in the context of Islam and religion, that is organized spiritual congregational practices. So, but he regarded Oro Ile as those religio-cultural practices that do not fall in the category of organized religion, that form part of the daily or periodic cultural activities of the Yoruba people. Yoruba was not the first person to use the term Oro Ile. He referred to several other earlier writers, particularly the Christian emigre writers like Ajayi Crowther and the likes. They were the first to refer to country fashion as Oro Ile by trying to separate, by trying to separate Yoruba religion from Yoruba traditional practices from religion. They didn't want to give Yoruba traditional practices a connotation of religion in the light or within the context of how Christianity was understood. So I adopted that into this study because women reproductive practices and the cultural activities of the Ife people do not necessarily fall into the religious aspect, but they are derived or extracted from religious understanding. So, going further, Ile-Ife is widely known. It has been written about extensively, and Ile-Ife is known to have several sociocultural, religio-political practices. Several authors have done that. But one of the most interesting work that examined the Orele in Ile-Ife is Adegoke Ebenezer's PhD thesis in King's College, London, titled A Study of the Role of Women in the Burial Rites of Ife of southwestern Nigeria. So in this study, the author was able to show the different Orele practices as far as burial practices or interment practices go in Ile-Ife. So this work was very useful to this study. So going further, I've been able to look for some secondary sources and also adopted primary sources, mostly interviews with women who had given birth, women who had been subjected to these Orele practices, and men who were at the center of providing these Orele services to these women. So what I found was that there are several categories of this Orele as far as women reproductive health goes or go. The first one has to do with conception challenges or medications for conception for women. So among the people or females, which could be daughters of the lineage or the wives of the lineage, some of them that I spoke with, they revealed that there were cases in which newly wedded women, that is, new brides in the family, Iyawo Tuntun, as said among the Yorubas, where they had challenges giving birth, because among the Yoruba, or should I say the Ife people, it is expected that a year after Ibeyawo marriage or wedding, the couple were expected to have delivered or gotten pregnant or to have given birth. So the people I spoke with said that there were instances where women, or the couple rather, the man and the wife, had challenges with conceiving. So I now asked, how have they been able to handle this? So they referred to some of the medical spiritual practices that they engaged. But at the center of these medical spiritual services were men. Of course, there were some women who were knowledgeable, but the people of Ife, or should I say among the people of Nigeria, it is believed that a female is going to marry and go off to the husband's house and settle there. So they do not necessarily pass the knowledge to the daughters, to their daughters in the lineage. So the men hold on to this knowledge. So this has placed them at the center of the reproductive health of the woman. So for conceiving, they have several categories of medical spiritual services they provided, such as Aseje. For instance, I was a type of Aseje, which I don't know what English equivalent to use, but I think I can translate that to mean medicinal meal. It's a type of meal that they cook that consists of several materials, herbs, leaves, animal parts, and things like that. So one of such medications of spiritual and religious medical services provided for this woman or to this woman was this type of medicinal meal that they said consisted of several herbs and the butt of a chicken that had been known to have laid eggs severally. Although I do not know the efficacy of these things, but it seems like they provide this service to women a lot. And some of the women I spoke with admitted that after consuming these materials, they were able to conceive. I don't know what medical problem the Aseje addressed in their body, but they were able to testify that yes, after consuming it, they were able to conceive. Then going further, the next type of medical challenge that they attend to is the issue of the follow-up of the prenatal process. So I asked this women, they said some of them admitted they visit hospital for prenatal care and attention, but that they also combine it with the indigenous, the Orele prenatal procedures. Meanwhile, some said they only relied on, that is particularly the poor people who have no means of affording medicines and things like that at the hospitals. They said they rely mostly on the prenatal services provided in the compound. So some of the prenatal care, before I go there, the prenatal care that I noticed, and that the snail would fall out, that, and that if the snail fell out each time they took the bath, it would indicate that the childbirth, the delivery date would be with ease, would come with ease, and that if the woman had difficulty making injecting the snail out of its shell, then it indicates that there were some potent problems, and they would have to conduct divinations and other processes, and that the woman would continue with the concussion bath and trying to get the snail out of this thing. So when I asked the women, they said, although some of them ended up carrying out cesarean section for their delivery, but some of them claimed at the point of delivery it was with ease, and they were able to successfully deliver the baby without so much pains and complications. Then finally, caregivers. They surrounded the women, they provided care and, by the men. And this included Omiero, for instance. In the Obatala temple, there's this Omiero. I don't know what English equivalent to use, but this Omiero was usually gotten during the festival of Obatala. So this water, this Omiero is extracted from certain herbs that are brought together, and one particular water from the holy well that are used to wash the effigies of Obatala and his material. So the content of the water was usually kept throughout the year. So people who had health challenges were given this water and whatever challenges. So this Omiero formed part of the components that women at the post-delivery or childbirth stage or what's being used. And according to them, the Omiero, helped them. It provided them with therapeutic, medicinal, and prophylactic benefits, which and I think the fact that they all believe that these things work for them, they've been able to sustain it over the years. And despite the fact that several sociocultural practices are died out, this particular orally that has to do with conception, prenatal, and post-delivery is still very strong among the people of Iraje and Ilefe, and Ilefe at large, because several houses have different childbirth stuff that they conduct for their family. So in conclusion, although this work is still in its early stage, but it is in the process, I realized that it was a very interesting thing to investigate, and I'm looking forward to investigating it further. But I think it's very going to regulate these things and bring it, mainstream it as part of Western medicine. So people who would like to combine the both or the two to focus on the indigenous methods would focus on them, but under the regulations of the government, to ensure the safety of the women who consume these things and the child or children who are exposed to these things. So I'll stop there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elubaju. That was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to have the next speaker, which is going to be Dr. Badejo. Dr. Mo Badejo is a senior lecturer in the Department of Philosophy at Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife, Nigeria. She specializes in metaphysics and logic. Her research focus is currently exploring the relationship between metaphysics and gender issues. Dr. Badejo has published 14 peer-reviewed articles and a book chapter contributing to the academic discourse on many valued logic, the problem of persistence in physics, gender issues such as domestic violence, ownership in Yoruba culture, and other contemporary issues. Our work on gender issues is particularly interested in showing how the traditional culture promotes gender equality and women's empowerment. So, Dr. Badeja, over to you.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. I'll be presenting the sketch of a paper. The paper is not yet ready. I'm still working on it. Titled Unveiling the Veil of Misogyny on Reproductive Health of Women in Nigeria. I will assume that we understand what reproductive health is, but according to the World Health Organization, it is seen as the female reproductive health, a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being in all matters relating to the reproductive system and to its functions and processes. And so when we are talking about a good female reproductive health, it implies that the woman has the freedom to make the decisions on how to have a satisfying and safe sex life, and also the freedom to make reproductive choices, such as the choice to reproduce or have sex, when and how, and also the frequency. So when we are talking about healthy reproductive health of the female, we are talking about reproductive autonomy, we are talking about family planning, we are talking about appropriate maternal care, and we are talking about the appropriate sexual health awareness. We're also talking about the prevention and treatment of reproductive health conditions and protection from gender-based violence, which is a very important aspect of healthy female reproductive health. Now, female reproductive health in Nigeria has advanced significantly, and there are a lot of positive strides, but there are still some significant challenges. And it will show first in the fact that Nigeria has one of the highest maternal mortality rates at the moment in the world. Nigeria doesn't have the highest, but it's still one of the highest countries with a very poor maternal mortality rate. Then we still have the issue of child marriage. We still have the issue of early pregnancy, and the data surrounding this is quite high, which shows that a lot of children are still being forced into marriage, and they are forced to get pregnant, which often leads to obstetric and fistula, which destroys many of these young girls. We still have the issue of female gender mutilation that is still actively going on in some parts of the country, despite the fact that some, of course, we've made some progress around this. A lot of people are now aware that it's unsafe and unhealthy for a girl to undergo this, but there are still some that are still hell-bent on doing this. We still have gender-based violence. We still have the problem of unsafe abortions. We still have the problem of inadequate access to healthcare. We have the problem of the lack of reproductive autonomy, the problem of violation of privacy and confidentiality around reproductive health issues for females. We have the problem of discrimination. We have the problem of male partners insisting that their female partners cannot undergo cesarean sections, and when they insist, they withdraw financial support. We have male partners not providing enough financial, emotionally, and psychological support during reproductive issues, such as delay in getting pregnant, and even during pregnancy, you have partners withdrawing their support at this moment. We have the lack of access to contraceptives. We have the lack of freedom to reproductive choices that many women are presently facing, and then the lack of autonomy to make reproductive choices. I'll give some examples, some of what provoked the paper. The first is the case of a woman I heard at the General Hospital. She just gave birth, and her mother-in-law came to help her. In antenatal classes, women are told that it is not necessary to undergo the steaming of the reproductive parts after birth, this steaming that people do culturally, hot water to help the blood clots to come out, to somehow cleanse your stomach. And this woman says she didn't want it because she was told in the hospital that it wasn't necessary, and with exercises she could go back to her pre-pregnancy state. But the mother-in-law insisted. And when she said no, the mother-in-law called people to hold her down, and they held her down on this bucket. And that's a violation of our autonomy to make reproductive choices. And because she was being forced, when she kept telling them that the water was too hot, they felt she was doing that because she didn't want to undergo it. Eventually, she had terrible scalding around the vagina area. And rather than take her to the hospital again, she wanted to go to the hospital. She couldn't go alone because she was badly injured. They still took a decision on her behalf to treat her at home. And they were using herbs and other things to treat her till the place got badly infected and she started having seizures. It was at the point of having seizures that they eventually rushed her to the hospital, but the woman did not make it. Another experience I had was I was to undergo a procedure, and the doctor told me that I had to inform my husband. Is your husband aware that you want to have this procedure? And I told the doctor that it is me that wants to have this procedure. It's my reproductive choice. The doctor said, I understand that it's you that wants to have the procedure, but I think you still need to inform your husband and all. And this is what a lot of women face. And if an educated woman who is partially financially independent has to go through this, I wonder what those who are not financially independent at all will have to face, and especially those who are not educated. I also remember the case of a woman, one of our cleaners in the department, that her husband sent out of the house. She was giving birth almost every year. And when she got tired and didn't want to go through this again, she told the husband that she wanted to do family planning, and the husband refused. And when the husband refused, she decided to go behind the husband to do it. And somehow from the hospital, someone informed the husband that they saw the wife, that she came to do this and came to do that, and the husband sent her packing. So that's also one of the problems of the lack of autonomy to make reproductive choices. And at the bottom line from research, it shows that the major connection, what connects all these problems that I just identified, is misogyny. It causes a lack of autonomy, causes financial abuse, leads to early marriage and pregnancy, leads to workplace inequities and discrimination, poor legal and policy structures, and sexual violence. There are still some ministries, some hospitals in Nigeria where you cannot get a maternity leave if you are pregnant but you are not married. You will not be allowed to take your maternity leave. And there are some places that even if you are married, if you have not changed your name to your husband's name, you do not adopt your husband's name, you will not be allowed to enjoy your maternity leave. There's also the problem of workplace inequities where a woman is afraid to get pregnant or to go on maternity leave because she might not meet her job when she comes back. And so all these problems are making it difficult for a lot of women to enjoy healthy reproductive health. So what should we do to combat these problems? The first is education at grassroots levels, especially in the rural areas, empowerment, financial autonomy, proper legal structures and policy changes. For example, recently, Sierra Leone's parliament just passed the law prohibiting child marriage, proper support networks, representation of women in policy making. For example, the law that prohibits child marriage in Sierra Leone was championed by women. We need enforcement of laws on medical confidentiality so that if you are getting a medical procedure, you are sure that your confidentiality is protected. Zero tolerance for gender-based violence and dismantling some cultural practices, and also serious media engagements. Thank you. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Badejo. One moment. So we're going to have the next presentation, which is going to be from Mayaku Joyce Olowoniyi. Mrs. Olowoniyi holds a Bachelor of Arts and Masters of Arts degrees from Department of Philosophy, Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife, Nigeria. She is now pursuing a doctorate degree in philosophy in the same department. Mrs. Olowoniyi is currently lectures in the General Studies Department of the Institute of Technology, Enhanced Learning and Digital Humanities at the Federal University of Technology, Akure, Futa. So, Mrs. Olowoniyi, let's go ahead with your presentation. Thank you. By the way, Dr. Badejo, sorry, that was a wonderful presentation. I should say that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Can we hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to present a paper with gender, femalehood or motherhood, re-examining Makinde's gender conflict or conflict of gender. That's a paper I'll be examining. This paper is actually an ongoing work. It is not a finished work, but I want to just show my ideas as it is ongoing. And that's what I'll be discussing. All right. Makinde wrote a paper, Gender Conflict and Conflict of Gender, and in it tries to make a distinction between gender conflict and conflict of gender. And in the distinction, his major argument is that conflict of gender is grounded in nature and can be justified from that point of view, while gender conflict is socially engineered. That is, it is human-made, and therefore it has no inherent justification. So that means when we talk about femalehood, malehood, motherhood, manhood, there is no inherent justification for that because it is socially engineered, natural, and it can be justified from that point of view. And as a result of this, Makinde is of the view that if we actually leave a gender conflict, because for him it won't exist if we actually understand that conflict of gender is naturally engineered, and that's what we should have. For him, what we have is to have a kind of complementarity thesis, which means cooperation between the gender that we have, and that will lead to a kind of disappearance theory of gender conflict, why conflict of gender will remain. The paper I'm working on is trying to argue against the basis of Makinde's distinction between conflict of gender and gender conflict. On the face value, one may want to disagree that is there any distinction, but then one may come to agree with Makinde if we look at what we have between literature in English and English literature. We know that there's a kind of difference. But in Makinde's analysis, conflict of gender is a work of nature. It is purely natural. And for him, it can't be interfered with, or it can't be altered, either by force, by legislation, or by human caprices. And it is exciting for him. That means conflict of gender is just conflict of gender is a kind of difference or a contrast that we have. And it has to do with the opposites that we have in nature. And these opposites that we have in nature for Makinde is such that it beautifies nature, it makes him work in nature. But when we talk about gender conflict for him, since it is socially conditioned, it varies from one culture to the other, from one society to the other. And that means it implies a kind of, it introduces a kind of possibility of thinking with the work of nature by means of social adjustments within this various society, either in favor of one sex or the other. In that regard, it means unlike what we have in conflict of gender, which has to do with difference or contrast, gender conflict means fight or a kind of struggle or quarrel, opposition or disagreement. Though one may think that this conflict of gender, the way Makinde made the distinction, is not as bad as we think, because if it is as a result of contrast of opposites in nature, it can work out. But then the way I want to come to address Makinde's distinction is to actually do a kind of disagreement with the basis of his argument. In the first place, he said nature is replaced with opposites, so that we have hot and cold, we have male and female, and that's what made things work out. But then if you come to look at it, beyond the male and female gender, just like if we have a situation where we have hot and cold, can we really say cold is the extreme opposite or the opposite of hot? If we are saying that is the way it appears in nature, it happens in nature, then what do we do? What do we call the opposite of iced or chilled? Are they still opposite or extreme opposite? That means we have a kind of varying degrees of temperature, not really an opposite. So I wouldn't want to agree with Makinde that male and female are opposites in nature. That's one of the basis of his argument. And in that case, I also try to argue that Makinde fails to understand that there's a notion of containment, of conflict, of gender conflict in conflict of gender. When he says gender conflict is socially engineered, he has forgotten that, though Mill argued that most of the assignments or the works we give to females in the society, they are delegated by the society, except the biological roles that we have. But he has forgotten also that Aristotle said man is a social animal. That means as far as these gender classes, as far as they are in nature, they can also not live without being in a society. That means if they exist in the society together, that means there is no way they wouldn't be influenced by that society. So making the distinction between conflict of gender and gender conflict on the basis of socially engineered things and things that are made by nature would not actually make a distinction between the female gender, the male gender, and as he claimed. So I argue that there's a notion of containment of gender conflict in conflict of gender. And that means his own theory that he tries to bring out, or where he tries to end this discussion, that what we have is a kind of disappearance theory of gender conflict. Why conflict of gender will remain through complementary thesis? Because since he is taking the gender, he's taking just two genders into consideration, he's considering just the male and female. He has forgotten that there are other forms of gender that we now have. Where is he putting cisgender, bigender, androgyny, and all those stuff? He's trying to just address this issue of femalehood, motherhood, as if all we have is just female and male, femalehood, motherhood, manhood, and malehood. But there are distinctions. There are more than enough distinctions or varieties within the gender stuff. So that means the notion of containment has actually brought out, has negated what he means by the complementarity thesis, because for his own complementarity thesis, which means complementarity thesis for him is a kind of cooperation between gender, which will lead to this disappearance of gender conflict, while we have conflict of gender as the only one remaining. That means the complementarity thesis is saying what we can't get in male, that's what we get in females. What we can't get in mothers, that's what we get in father, or in motherhood, that's what we can get in fatherhood. Because of that, what one lacks, the other has. So there's no point for conflict, there's no point for disagreement, there's no point for difference, there's no point for quarrel. But what we should have is that what one lacks, the other we give. Since that's the perspective from which he is seeing it, and I'm seeing it from a different perspective, that nature is not just replated with opposite. There are many things within this opposite that is failing to take cognizance of. The notion of containment will necessitate the fact that this complementarity thesis, what we will have left, will be more than that disappearance, because that gender conflict will not disappear. That gender conflict will still be there, in as much as all these genders, not considering just the female and the males, the mothers and the fathers now in the society, but considering all others. Another point I want to raise is this. Let's assume, for the purpose of argument, like he illustrated, he said, if there is a kind of bar in between male and female, and we have a set of males on one side, while we have set of females on the other side. He said, given the opposite that we have, that these people from one end will necessarily break the bar and cross over to the other side. But then, if there's a kind of attraction between male and female, won't that conflict still happen? I mean, if a male is attracted to another male, or if a male is attracted to two other males on that same side, won't that conflict still exist, even if they are just the mere opposite that we have? So that means necessarily there's a notion of containment, and this complementarity thesis will not be unless we have the notion of containment that will now tell us that this conflict of gender exists and this conflict also exists. If gender conflict exists, then what we should look for is to find a means of solving this gender conflict through all these means we have been talking about, that people, gender contestants, have been arguing about. Not that we should seek for a kind of disappearance theory through gender parity or gender neutrality and co. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mrs. Zoloni. That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you. So we have our final panelist, who is Mr. Babatunde Okoyemi Salami. Mr. Salami is a PhD student in African Cultural Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the US. His interests are in African screen media and popular culture, domestic studies, and African performances. He has a BA in English from the University of Ilorin, Nigeria, and an MA in English literature from the University of Lagos, Nigeria. So please take it away, Mr. Salami.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes. You're muted again.
Just tell her that you are in person. You are here in person. She can hear us from here. Put up your video and tell her you are here in person, so she know you are here. Because you are saying. Hi, Dr. Ajayi.
Yes.
This is the camera. This is the microphone. The thing is, hi, Dr. Ajayi. Can you hear us here?
Yes, I can hear you.
So,
Babatunde
Okoyemi is there in person.
Okay.
Yes, so he won't be joining on Zoom, but he's there in person and he's the one on the camera.
Okay. Thank you. I can see that, but I cannot hear him still.
But she can hear me.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. My name is Okoyemi, and my presentation is titled Interrogating Parenting in Fragmented Screen Media. And I'm basically just using these two short media forms to interrogate the idea of parenting against the backdrop of reproductive justice in Africa. Reproductive by Solinga and Ross is more than just the right to have children and the right not to do so. It also includes the right to parent a child in a safe and healthy environment. What this paper does to the third tenet, that parenting aspect, by pausing to ask parenting. I interrogate and expand the definition of parenting within the framework of reproductive justice in two African screen media productions. This paper asks if extended family members have authority in the marriage or family formations of couple. The paper is asking paper is asking if the authority of extended family members terminate or tarry after the union of family is constructed. I do all of these things against the backdrop of family using Bob Abishola. And in the second film called Kumzi by Wanuri Kayu, I established that the idea of parenting is expanded to liberate female reproductive from the reductive scope of biological replication. The concepts of birthing are deconstructed through the short film, so that women's reproduction can become ungendered and acts of biological creativity surpasses procreation concerns. Ultimately, this paper questions parenting perception of family and creativity in relations to bodily autonomy. So, in the first film, we see a family, and in the second film, we see a different kind of family. These are some of the terms that I'm dealing with. Okay, these are the terms I'm dealing with: parenting, mothering, reproduction, fragmented forms, basically short forms, and African family. Next slide, please. And this is the working definition that I'm, working with. I'm trying to say that having children, not having children is very important to reproductive justice, but so it's very well area to look at. Next slide. So Bob Abishola, which is the first film I'm working on, is a situational comedy, a sitcom about Bob, who is a white American male businessman, and Abishola is a female Nigerian immigrant nurse. That's all you want to know. Focus of the episode I'm working on, which is titled "No One Man, No Baby," remains a constant and heavy presence of extended family. So if you look at that picture, when you look behind, see that you don't even know that the house belongs to Bob and Abishola. In the frame, it's to, Abishola's mother by the right of the screen and Bob's mother by the left of the screen. And then you see at the center page, you don't even see the picture of the couple. What do you see? Show you that the heavy presence of family is there. So where extended refers to, defining extended as members of the family and other closely related stakeholders other than the immediate family members. It is preoccupied, this paper, with the clash between the reproductive choice of Bob and Abishola as a couple and their extended family desires and opinions. The couple, Bob and Abishola, is subtly divided on the matter as Bob wants a baby, but Abishola would rather not have one besides the one she has in her previous marriage. Abishola therefore must contend with her husband's desire and also the pressure from her husband, from her family, and from her friends who pervade her domestic and workspace. Now, when Abishola is at work, constantly with them and they're pressuring her, so she's facing these things. And the parents, basically these two grandmothers or mothers, as the case may be, in their own understanding, believe that their presence is needed and help. Hence, the couple feel choked by their presence, relentless prognosing. Now, despite this negative side that I've shown, the communal nature of the African family life fosters togetherness, which provides for healthy community presence and emotional support. Although Abishola's life seems to be constantly intruded on by her mother and her aunt and even her friends at work, we find that these people also help in nurturing our son daily. Now, due to this communal presence, she needs not worry about the welfare of her son while she spends long hours at work as a nurse in the US and even more hours studying for a medical exam because she wants to become a doctor. There is then a sense that family presence provides support and solidarity. They make possible the necessity for the tenets of reproductive justice that Ricky Solinger and Loretta Ross calls a healthy environment for nurturing of children. It therefore becomes impossible to discredit the influence and stake of extended family members within the context of reproductive life and choice. As such, Abishola remarks in our private conversation about having a child with Bob that so many people wanted. This event begs the question whether parents and other extended family members have the right to intervene, opine, and have expectation towards the reproductive lives of couples. More importantly, it makes sense to ask whether women still have agency over their reproductive lives when they exist within extended family frames. I leave all of these questions unanswered. Next film. Yes. Now the next film is Pumzi. This is a still from the film. Pumzi was produced in 2009. It is set in a post-apocalyptic, perhaps a post-apocalyptic. We learn through an on-screen intertile at the start of the movie that the world has been destroyed by what is called a water war. So there was no water, and the water that was available has been polluted. And as a result, what we see is a dry desert world of nothingness and sparse inhabitants. The protagonist, called Asha, is the one on the frame, and is a Black woman with dreams to revive the dying earth. Now, Wanuri Kayu's 23 minutes short film does what Nedi Okafor does with her short literary pieces, like Spider the Artist. And what this does is to tell stories about Africa, about how Africa is bearing the brunt of global modernization and the casualties that the continent may suffer if the world continues in the current trajectory of capitalist agenda. I mean, many scholars have talked about how it is that Africa becomes a wasteland depot, basically. And I'm looking at this planetary concern in relation to reproductive justice in this film. So nature as mother. I want to say that an imagery of starvation is seen on screen just 13 minutes into the film. And the signpost that Asha walks past reads, "Caution, nuclear radioactive river." The imagery of death and dying is not captured only through an anthropocentric gaze, not just from a human perspective. Now, we see that as the camera pans through a particular museum in the Maitu remnant facility, where that was like the only facility where humans still exist, we find a rustic-looking seedling in a glass jar presented in a moving close shot. A caption that tagged the jar below reads, "Maitu," meaning mother, seed. So Maitu seed, meaning mother seed. I want to argue that this scene in Pumzi, which displays, I want to argue that further into the film, the last scene in Pumzi, which displays Asha's planting and nurturing of the seedling, is a call to repentance for humans in their treatment of nature. As much as this scene symbolically portrays images of birthing and nurturing, it's insufficient in explaining the process through which humans can undo the impact of the Anthropocene, or at least trace back their step to a less destructive path. To account for what is missing in this scene, I turn to another scene, which is the scene you see on screen, where we first see Asha on screen. So this is the first time we see Asha on screen. I argue that this scene provides a realistic hermeneutics that justifies the quick and rapid growth for the seed, a quick and rapid growth for the seed Asha nest. Within this frame, which captures Asha sleeping on the table, as we can see, that houses several seedling glass jars, I argue that Kahir presents us with 4 symbolic stages of nesting or incubation necessary for the actualization of ecological rebirth. So there's no family in this thing, almost like we don't have a lot of human beings anymore. But I'm saying there's a gesture that is interspecies, that is with the environment. Now, this incubation is one that entails planning and gathering of ideas. Secondly, it involves investing or feeding the ideas for incubatory maturity. And the third thing is the pre-birth labor. That is the effort and precautions required to carry matured ideas to term. The last, or the fourth, which spans through the previous 3, is rumination on the idea and communication about it with others. The frame described above depicts, this one we're seeing on screen, depicts Asha in a nesting image over the seed. This favors the kind of maternal care that birds often give to their offspring. Its usage between a woman and a plant seed buttresses the interspecies fraternity on a non-hierarchical basis, as the likes of Chakrabarti and Iyeka have advocated for. So next slide. I'm going to take from this next slide very easy and just explain a little bit. So what is happening basically is that I'm arguing that there are other ways that we can look at mothering that is beyond the biological. So without talking down on biological motherhood, I use that image of biological motherhood that many are familiar with to say that there are other ways of also mothering, of creating, of producing. And if we look at this film, if we look at this frame, we see that, you know, basically she's bare-chested at this point. Camera covers what is going on in front, but we can see that she's basically bare-chested. And what she's doing is because she has gone through she has gone through a long walk, I argue, she's now sweating, and she water the seed that you see her nesting on previously. So that is an imagery of breastfeeding, right? Next slide. And in the next slide, what we see basically is like, you know, basically cuddling, basically. Child, the first thing is the child is giving usually to the mother, and then cuddles the baby, so to speak. And I mean that goes on, that nurturing goes on for a very long time. And this is basically what we see happening here. And then the next slide, please. And in this next slide, I just want to explain that a little. The ending transition, which is what we're seeing on the screen right now, figure 5, was given to us basically from a close shot of Asha tending to the seedling through a drone shot. So we see the drone upward, and it's like as the drone moves up, we see the tree growing and flourishing into from the seed into a big tree with a canopy. I argue that this final posture should not be summarized as an act of martyrdom. Now, a scholar like Criticise and Eco-Critic has defined this as basically, you know, basically an act of martyrdom. Rather, I'm saying that it should be read as an act of creation made possible by Asha's innovation and resilience. Asha is not simply laying down her life for others. She's working for herself, for her allies, and for her future in ways that guarantee continuity and prosperity. Therefore, our labor is not merely sacrificial. It's not just a labor of love. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, those are really powerful presentations. And so far, the presentations are all geared towards trying to respond to the larger questions that we asked, right? While we propose this panel to think about all of the ways that motherhood, fatherhood, parenthood are being redefined or not within the context of this so-called modern reproductive technologies or modern biological motherhood, or the ways that motherhood, parenthood have been gendered or not, right? So thinking about the contemporary times that we have, but also not being mindful of where we are as a culture, as a people, as Nigerians, as Africans. What do all of this mean for us? And so the first presentation, we're thinking about the modern kinds of surrogacy, but also thinking about how we have something similar and thinking about how we can decolonize our thoughts on that. So for instance, if we think about the perhaps like non-gendered or gender neutral, or however we want to conceive it, of motherhood and parenthood, then we think about reducing the pressure on particular identities or gender identities when there are fertility challenges. And that can make us to really rethink constructively around how we access the modern Eurocentric Western form of ideologies around reproduction. The same goes for the second presentation when we think about how we can think about all of this more broadly within cultural gender contexts that we already have existing. Then we can think more about how reproduction is not just the woman, right? And then we can think about it can be more communal, and that can help in really thinking about empowering all gender equality around reproduction. And then the autonomy might be given to the person who is doing the reproducing biologically when we think about Dr. Badejo's presentation. And then when we come to Dr. Elugbaju, was really thinking about all of the traditional ways, the medicine that we also have available to treat infertility, and how we can also continue to remember that and decolonize our thoughts against the backdrop of the very, very contemporary modern way of IVF, surrogacy, not that they are not good, but also to think more broadly and more holistically about what we also have that continue to be relevant, right? And so we can think about African traditional medicine in that regard as well. And then when we connect that to Mrs. Olowoniyi, right, we can think about how when we also think more broadly, and this also still reminds me of Oyeronke Oyewumi's book of What Gender is Motherhood. So we think about Abiyamo more broadly, which is the Yoruba terminology for parenthood more broadly, that is not gendered. Then we might be able to be more critical about how we think about conflicts of gender or gender conflicts in connection with reproduction. And this might open up maybe new frontiers of research about what this means for us within the context of the very popular ways that biological motherhood is being emphasized, and there are a lot of complex issues around that. And we can also connect that to the reproductive justice conversation from Okoyemi Salami, to really think about, if we think about more reproductive justice more broadly, then we can begin to rethink the emphasis on biological motherhood and the pressure of fertility on a particular gender, the woman, the mother. Maybe think about it more broadly, and then we can continue to have a more holistic reproductive approach, reproductive justice approach on the continent in Nigeria. So I think these all kind of like sync and come together to really think about how this is not just reproduction, it's connection to gender, epistemology, decoloniality, in the ways that we continue to navigate what modern motherhood, fatherhood, and all of these identities and terminologies around reproduction would mean for us. So I open it now to questions and answer. So there was one question that I responded to on the question and answer box, and it was thinking about, since surrogacy is not yet legalized, how do we approach getting research respondents for studies on surrogacy? And I was really thinking about it as well. So joining those groups, right? I joined a few of them already. So whoever is interested, join those groups on Facebook, on WhatsApp, on Instagram. Just as a regular person who is trying to understand or get information, you will be able to connect with people who might be willing to grant you anonymous interviews, and then you can build your research on that. And I think it's really an open space to really start doing those kinds of critical interviews and field work on this particular field. So thank you. Any other questions? It's open to the floor. Questions? Feel free to raise the hand or drop the questions in the question and answer box. So while we're waiting for all the questions to come up, I have a question for Dr. Badejo. So it was really, really great presentation, thinking about the bodily autonomy, or just the autonomy of the person who is now biologically responsible for birthing, right? And your emphasis was on the woman, and how we're thinking about misogyny and maybe gendered oppression in that space. So what are your thoughts on this? Do you think this is a new thing that is developing with modernity, in this time? Or do you think this has always been the case, where women would have to, struggle to have a voice on their own reproductive lives? So I just wanted to give, further context to that. What are your views from your research viewpoint?
All right, thank you. I can't talk for every part of Nigeria. I can't talk for every tribe, I can't talk for every woman in every tribe in Nigeria, but I can talk for the Yoruba woman. I think the suppression and patriarchal structures got worse with colonialism for the Yoruba woman. It wasn't as bad. Of course, it would be over-romanticizing if we say we did not have those patriarchal structures before colonialism. But I think it got worse after colonialism. The economic power for the woman dropped after colonialism, because colonialism, for example, that introduced adopting husband's name after marriage, which is now a problem for some women who choose not to, that they want to go on maternity leave, and they'll tell them that if they do not share the same surname as their husband. And it also shows in NYC, you have married women who want to go and serve, and they tell them that they must share the same name with their husband, or they will not be recognized as married, even despite the fact that they have their marriage certificates. So some of these practices came with colonialism. And I think to deconstruct misogyny as it affects reproductive health of women, we have to also look at the roots. Where did it come from? How did it start? And maybe we can correct some of these things. If we can appreciate some of our cultural practices and go back to these practices, I think they might help. For example, the lack of economic power or the decline in economic power of women in the Yoruba tribe, for example, has not only affected women, but it's also affecting men because they now have to bear more burden than they used to. You know, if you look at Yoruba history, for example, you don't see anything like Babaloja originally, but you have Iyaloja, which shows that women held a lot of economic and purchasing power at that time, which is no longer the case now. So I think the problem started, or the problem intensified with colonialism and the introduction of foreign religions into the Yoruba people setting. I won't talk for other parts of Nigeria. That's the one I'm familiar that I've done research, I've researched into, and I've noticed that it got worse with colonialism. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. And we have another question on the chat box or question and answer box.
So someone is raising a hand on the Zoom, one of the attendees online.
Okay. I am unable to see that, but if they can just go ahead with their questions, see if we can hear them, and then we'll take the final questions afterwards. So can this person go ahead? Okay, now I can see.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, I'll be quick because I'm traveling. So Professor Esther Jailo, thank you for putting together this excellent and very important panel. My question is for this is Professor Mugwe. Hello from the US. I have two questions for you. The first one is, what is the role of senior or elder men in the family in conversations about reproduction? And I say that as someone who at 41 years old was not married and had no children, and my uncles and my grandparents, my grandfather started to say, you know what, this is an emergency. The men must get involved now. The grandmas and the aunties are not convincing her enough. And it was shocking for me because I wasn't used to men, my uncles, being involved. And so to them it was, and obviously it worked because now I'm married and have a child. And my second question is about Pumzi. You discussed the ending of the film, but when you pan out, when the camera or the drone pans out, you see that nature has already returned. So I see almost her death as tragic, almost a sacrifice.
We're losing you, Prof.
Professor Mogu, we can't hear you anymore.
Of motherhood. Thank you.
Okay. Professor, thank you. We lost you a little bit, but I think Okoyemi wants to respond to maybe the first part of your question.
So yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Your question put me off balance a little bit, but I think the way I'm going to answer that first question is to say that from the little experience I have on screen media generally, men are not very much involved when it comes to the reproductive, being involved in the productivity, especially when it comes to when we're looking at the African context, right? So I learned the expression "we are pregnant" for a couple to say "we are pregnant" when I got to the West. So, and I use it deliberately, this idea, because this idea of ungendered parenting or ungendered mothering is not I'm not even doing it from a feministic sense to say, I'm doing it from a familiar sense to say that, see, this child belongs to more than one person, usually, and even usually belongs to more than the couple, in many cases. It can belong to, number is not a variable. It can be from one to many. So I think where I'm going with this is that men need to be more involved, because what screen media is showing is that men are not actively involved. Maybe they are dictating, they are calling the shots because of patriarchy, but they're not actively involved in that creation or the creativity process. So I answer that question that way. Regarding the sacrifice thing, yes, I know that my analysis is a bit controversial, but I think I'm just trying to maybe rescue some kind of agency to say that women's labor does not always have to be sacrificial alone. Let's not just look at it as they are sacrificing, because if that's all that there is, then it's tragic. But if we see that what is happening is that the tree is living through Asha, then it makes more sense to say, you know, women don't always have to die, don't always have to give without getting back. To say that there can be something to get from it. To say that maybe productivity for women can be progressive. I think that's the kind of argument I'm trying to. I don't know if I'm forcing it on the film, but I want to say that that tree is living, or Asha is living through that tree. That the retention or the prosperity of that tree is synonymous to the prosperity and immortality of Asha. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jope.
Thank you, Akwe, and thank you, Professor Mogu, for that question. So we have a final question because we only have 2 minutes, and this is from Olorunimbe Folaranmi Flourish. The presentation from the panelists were wonderful and insightful. Each of the panelists indeed offer more nuanced and impactful understanding of the complexities of identity, representation, and social change. My question to all panelists is, what is the significance of their research beyond extending our knowledge to reproductive identities, gender, class, race, and so on? For example, what do we learn from this research that we might not expect, or how might it influence contemporary practice? So Dr. Olugbaju, if you could take a shot of that, and then Mrs. Olowoni, maybe 2 of you, since you have not had a question to answer. So like one minute from each of you, and then we can round it all up.
And there's also one more question from the audience here. One question from someone here.
Oh, okay. So let's get this one question answered by Dr. Olugbaju and Soloni, and then I'll take the last question if we have the time. I think we need to be out by 9:15 a.m. my time. I can't remember what Nigerian time it is. Okay. Dr. Olugbaju, do you want to respond to that question?
Well, I was thinking maybe Mrs. Olowo, Mrs. Olowo, you would like to go first.
Okay. Mr. Oloni, you're muted.
Thank you. Yes, I'm unmuted now. Thank you for this question. I think beyond what we have discussed about the reproductive identity, my own aspect of the presentation is trying to say that there is a need for us to acknowledge the fact that gender conflict exists. And it is not just between the male and the female who have the reproductive identities. What we should know is that there are some other genders in between, and that's what I was emphasizing when I said Mackinday argues that nature is replete with opposites and is just taking male and female gender into consideration without considering some other factors, other genders in between. So this presentation is saying we should put into consideration that in our contemporary world, there are other aspects of gender that we have not taken cognizance of, those we know now, and those that may still come up later. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And I will also take 1 minute to just respond to that question. So thinking about the significance of my research in contemporary times. So as a child of 2 mothers, right, who had personal, familiar, communal arrangements, to my biological mother to come in as a co-wife and have me, I had me over to our co-wife, the older wife, and I didn't get to know who my biological mother is until I was 13. And it was within the family, it was communal. And I know a lot of instances like that in my community, in my culture, where this person is Mama Shino, Mama Dari, and sometimes you cannot tell if that child is biological or not. So thinking about that and then connecting that to the contemporary forms of surrogacy that is becoming more commercialized, transactional, capitalistic, and all of the complexities, for us to remember that we have an existing pragmatic approach and very holistic approach to think about infertility and how we can challenge it. So that way we know that there are options beyond the Eurocentric form of surrogacy that is beginning to evolve, right? So that for me is one part, and to think about parenthood more broadly, and not just like really connected to what assisted reproductive technologies can offer right in the moment, while that is still also useful, but just like opening up that conversation to remember all of the other options that people might, continue to think about, so that we do not forget and we do not think that surrogacy is a new invention, quote and unquote, so to say, right? So that for me is one significance and takeaway from this research that I'm developing on surrogacy. And I'll be inserting my story and other stories of the very traditional African surrogacy system and strategies, and putting that against the backdrop of the contemporary surrogacy kinds that are evolving. Let's see the last question. I am not able to see that question. Can this person unmute and say their question aloud?
The person is not asking the question again. The person is here in person, but the person is not asking again anymore.
Okay, all right. So thank you all so very much. I think, we've come to the end of this amazing panel. Very challenging conversation, and we can keep this conversation going. You can check the email addresses of the panelists if you want to reach out to them, if you want to continue having this conversation. And thank you all for attending. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, everyone. Right. Thank you.
That's true. Should I say from there? Oh, I don't want to make mistake about the mistake. And I forgot what I was to say. It should be from here.
So do we stop the recording now, right? And am I free to leave?
Yes, funny. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for holding the space for us there. Very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, and